Okay, ready, gentlemen? Okay, I want to apologize. We're starting about 7 minutes late. We had a closed session that ran a little bit long. I want to call to order the February 9th, 2009 City Council Redevelopment Agency meeting for the City of San Carlos. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excuse me. All right, thank you. Item number 2, changes to the order of agenda. Gentlemen, any changes to the order of agenda? Staff? Okay, thank you. Item 3, report from closed session. Mr. Rubens?
No reportable action tonight, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Item number 4, council communications and announcements. Mr. Grocott?
Thank you. Just a couple of items. I think we all received a email from Bernie about the restaurant issue in the downtown. Perhaps not. Some of us did, anyways. Bernie Mellett, I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She sent us an email talking about how many restaurants we have downtown, new ones and current ones, and so forth, and the impact it's having as she sees it. The only reason I bring it up is I think what she talks about in her email is probably maybe worthy of discussion if council wishes to discuss it. I see it as being something worthy that we might want to tweak some of what we did in the past in terms of parking, or look at some other measures that might just turn the dial down a little bit on how many restaurants we have in the downtown. We're about to have, I think, 2 more new ones shortly, one where the children's store was on the corner. And I'm not saying it's a bad location, but there's going to be a new restaurant there, and there's another one that's planned at another location I can't think of right now. But anyways, she sent the email. She has a concern, and I think it's something that we could at least look at and discuss. Maybe we take no action, but we might want to look at some of those policies we did years ago that caused us to have so many restaurants, which, again, I don't want to be seen as saying that's a bad thing, but sometimes you need to relook at things and make adjustments. So that's one item. And then just the second item, just for public disclosure, it's probably on our website, but there was an article in the paper that the renovation project, the synthetic turf, is the documents are there for public comment and to take a look at. So that's the Highlands Park project. Thank you.
Mr. Grocott? Mr. Amat?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Nothing tonight.
Vice Mayor Royce?
Nothing tonight either. Thank you.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Lewis. I apologize. How could I miss you?
Yes.
You're wearing blue. That's why.
Yeah. Thank you for noticing. No, nothing to update. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And I have nothing tonight. Moving on to item 5, commissions and awards. 5A, consideration of reappointing Mark Green, Mark Lockenmeyer, and Scott Marsters to the Economic Development Advisory Commission with terms ending 1/30/2012.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Christine Boland, City Clerk. Staff is recommending that you reappoint Mr. Green, Mr. Lockenmeyer, and Mr. Marsters to the Economic Development Advisory Commission for 3-year terms ending January 30th, 2012. Thank you.
Any discussion on this matter?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Lewis.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Vice Mayor Royce. Any more discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right. Thank you. Item 6, public comment. This is for persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on something that's not on the posted agenda tonight? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. Item 7, approval of consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. Gentlemen?
Mr. Mayor, I move for the approval of the consent calendar items 7A through D,
And I think now's the time you can read the
and then
ordinance.
read the ordinance. And Mr. Mayor, I think there was a procedural issue that
You can read it now, it's on consent.
ordinance number 1406, reading ordinance number 1406, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of St. Carlos authorizing an amendment to the contract between the City Council of the City of St. Carlos and the Board of Administration for the California Public Employee Retirement System.
Is there a second to Mr. Ahmad's motion?
Second.
A second to Mr. Grocott. Any further discussion on any of these items? Hearing none, have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on. Item 8, reports to council. Item 8A, strategic plan update, plan for and implement long-term financial sustainability. Mr. Jeff Maltby, our financial services, administrative services director. I always have to get these titles right. Is that right?
That's right.
Boy,
Nailed it.
Boy, what do I get for that?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. This report tonight is following up on several items that were included in the strategic plan related to the city's financial sustainability. Specifically, those strategic planning items are by March 1st, 2009, the City Council Ad Hoc Finance Subcommittee, which consists of Vice Mayor Royce, Councilmember Ahmad, City Treasurer Mike Galvin, working with City Manager Mark Weiss and myself, will report to the City Council on probable modifications and or options to the budget process, including how expenses and existing revenues are presented. By March 1st, 2009, the City Council Ad Hoc Finance Subcommittee, working with the Manager and Administrative Services Director, will recommend to the City Council for action sustainable and affordable programs and services. And by March 1st, 2009, the City Council Ad Hoc Finance Subcommittee, working with the City Manager and Administrative Services Director, will recommend to the City Council whether or not to have a Community Finance Committee and a City Council Audit Subcommittee. On the issue of the budget and possible modifications, the subcommittee, working with staff, developed a core services model. And I don't want to go into that in too much detail right now because that specific item is actually on the agenda later tonight. But in short, the core services model seeks to expand the current budget process that we've got in place. It will allow the city departments to provide the council with information on their entire program structure. It won't include all the financial data, but it will give you an idea of what the programs are and how they rank in relationship to one another based on the criteria of the form that is heavily weighted to look at whether or not a service is mandated under some existing law or not, and then other criteria such as how is that program financed and what type of constituency does it serve and how wide a constituency and all those types of things, and are there other models to provide that service to the public. Moving on from there, the issue of the subcommittee recommending to the council ongoing sustainable, affordable programs and services. The subcommittee really felt that that was too broad a topic for them to handle. They felt that that particular issue really was the purview of the City Council through the various financial reporting instruments that we've got, such as the annual budget process, the mid-year budget review that we're going to have in 2 weeks, the annual financial statement and audit reporting process, labor negotiations, and the other touchstones that the City Council really has the opportunity to affect the overall financial direction of the city. So that one they were sort of deferring to the overall City Council. On the issue of developing a community finance committee or a council audit subcommittee, the ad hoc committee felt that they weren't inclined to recommend the creation of either one of those for a number of reasons. Probably primarily one of the most important reasons were timing issues. Because of the fact that a lot of our financial information flows through the state and the county before it reaches the city in terms of what our tax revenue will be and other issues alike, that information is already a couple months old by the time it gets to us. Several years ago, before our current city manager got here and changed the budget process, we had a multiple-year budget process And so that maybe would have worked a little bit better there, but because we're on an annual budget process right now, our timelines for getting to the budget are so short. By the time we really start to get any financial information on this year, which is just flowing in now, we're really preparing to bring information to the council forward for the next annual budget. If we were to insert another committee, another public committee into that process, we would really struggle with the current staff level we've gotten, and even beyond just the staffing and cuts we've had, just being able to get all the necessary information to that committee, allowing them time to deal with it, and then bringing that forward to the council in a timely enough fashion to adopt an annual budget. The timelines are just very, very tight there. But the subcommittee didn't give up. They felt like there was benefit there for the council in additional information, and that led to the creation of the new quarterly financial reporting document that is also on the agenda later this evening. And so we'll get into a little more detail on that later. But they felt like that would be the opportunity for the staff to communicate with the council and the public on a more frequent basis about where we are at with the city's finances. And that would give the council, the public, the opportunity, or 4 more opportunities potentially over the course of the year, to hear about any anomalies or changes in the city's current finances versus what we were looking at per budget, and comment and provide direction to staff and the city council. So those are really the comments I've got as it relates to this item. I'm not sure if either one of the subcommittee members would care to comment. I don't believe the city treasurer is here tonight, is he? No.
Mr. Royce or Mr. Ahmad, did you want to comment on any of the thing Mr. Malpe said?
We will be talking about the quarterly report and the budget improvements later on the agenda items there. Yeah.
Any questions from the other council members of Mr. Malpe? Yes, Mr. Grocott?
I had one, and I had brought this up before and was thinking it might be discussed by the committee, and I think it was my idea was a little misunderstood. I brought up the idea of, on the fire side, we have 2 council members that sit on the fire board. And what I've found from that experience, and I think the mayor has probably found the same thing, is, I know more about the fire department than really any other city department. I understand how the companies work, how some of the staffing issues work, the equipment, things like this. And so it helps then to understand, when you talk about the financial matters of it, to know really what it is you're talking about. And I think it also gives our council the advantage that when their financials come here, their budget, you've got 2 people who've already vetted it, looked at it, debated it, and tweaked it a little bit, sometimes pushing back, at certain things. And so I had made the comment, what if we had a similar kind of board, if you will, that deals with the police department, because that, those 2 combined are about, what I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong on the figure, but about 54% of our budget is police and fire. Yeah. And I think police, of that 54%, is even a bigger portion than fire is. So if we had 2, or I guess if you'd have to notice the meetings, if you had 3 council members that met, even on a quarterly basis or something, and looked at the police department and looked at its operations and studied its budget and knew a little bit more about it. When I said I was misunderstood on the idea, I think the staff thought I was talking about a police commission, and I'm not. I'm talking more about I guess you could call it a finance committee that looks at the police department and, looks at its operations.
I'd be willing to can we talk about would it be possible to talk about it at our retreat?
Well, that's what the council opted to do.
Okay. I want to make sure that you're heard on that. So,
okay.
Yeah. But I think that's the spot that we can vet that a little more and have some more time to talk about it. It hasn't been lost. At least it hadn't in my mind been lost. So.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis, any questions or comments?
My comment is that it was great to read this report, and I wanted to thank staff and council members Royce and Ahmad for diving into this. I think about maybe 6 months ago. You guys came in with a head of steam on this, and staff, rather than be resistant to it, sort of said, great, let's do it, and you guys jumped on it. I think you've done a really nice analysis of this. The quarterly financial report that I read so far, I'm anxious to hear more details about it tonight, but it was readable and more understandable than some of the stuff that I've gotten in the past. And also, I'm looking forward to the conversation about the core criteria by which we can start to judge our different budget items. But all this is trying to, make the process more transparent, more understandable for everybody. And for me, it's just a great example of taking some energy and enthusiasm and time that you guys have put into it, staff being open to it, and also making progress in this regard that's, I think, good for everybody. So I wanted to thank everybody that got involved with this for it's very positive forward progress for us in our budgeting, and thanks for that.
Definitely like to thank Jeff and Rebecca and Mike Galvin and the two council members and everybody else who worked on this. I mean, like Councilmember Lewis said, this is definitely improved. Just as Mr. Grocott said earlier, the more we know about everything, the better decisions we're going to make. So it's great. Thanks, Mr. Maltby.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Item 9A, public hearing. Consideration of introducing an ordinance authorizing an increase in sewer rates by 7% for fiscal year 2009-10, which is a Proposition 218 public hearing. Mr. Well, Robert?
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Just to review some of the basics, the City of St. Carlos operates a sewer system, a sewer utility, that the overall budget for that utility is about $7 million. Of that, $4.3 million is for collecting the wastewater, and $2.7 million is for treating the wastewater. So what we're talking about tonight is the treatment side, and we're talking about capital costs associated with the treatment side, and that's what's driving this need for a rate increase. I did read about the core services, and the sewer utility is a core service. It's mandated by law. It's critical to public health. It serves the entire city, and it does have a dedicated revenue stream. And there are no alternative service providers, nobody else in this business. The treatment plant was completed in 1980, same year I graduated from college. And some parts of the treatment plant are wearing out, just like me. But unfortunately, we can't afford to let the treatment plant fail. And it is a well-designed and well-operated plant, but it's in need of electrical upgrades, control upgrades. The basic structure is sound, the basic system is sound, but pieces of it need to be replaced. And the price tag for that is about $104 million. And $10 million of debt has been already issued to get this ball rolling and get the repairs in place. The city is a member of a 4-agency joint powers authority, and as a member of that joint powers authority, the city is responsible for its share of this debt. And this proposed rate increase will provide the financing for San Carlos' share of a portion of the debt, $50 million, of which 10 has been issued so far. Now, additional rate increases may be needed in the future because there's that other $54 million of financing. There's also a big price tag not only on the treatment plant but on the pipes and pumps that get the wastewater to the treatment plant, the conveyance system it's called. And those costs haven't really been worked out yet. There's part of a master plan that's going on right now. And then the city's own collection system, while we've really addressed the day-to-day operations and the capital renewal of that, the collection system is falling short in its performance. And we do need to look at how that's performing. We're required by law to do a sanitary sewer management plan that's due by August 2009, and that will identify some of the shortcomings of our sewer collection system, and that will form the basis of possible rate increases in the future. So this rate increase is targeted just for fiscal year 2009-10, and then about the same time next year we'll probably be looking at similar kind of issues. Now, there are a number of things that property owners can do to keep sewer costs down, to keep the sewers clean, to prevent spills and overflows, and to reduce costs. Something called fats, oils, and grease, or FOG, is a huge problem. People when they're cooking, if they put the fats, oils, and grease down the drain instead of putting them in a can and throwing that into solid waste, that clogs up their own sewer pipes and the city sewer pipes. And we have a much higher rate of sanitary sewer overflows than I would like to see, and also a high rate of sewer claims. So The Public Works Department is initiating an outreach effort to address this and other issues. We've got a card that's going out to each property owner that gets sewer service. What every homeowner needs to know about sewer system maintenance and preventing sewer backups. And inside of it will be a place with an insert that's specifically to San Carlos. This card comes from the Association of Bay Area Governments, and then we're going to customize it with specific information. We're also working on our website to get information out to the public, and we're working with the SBSA pollution prevention staff on things that people can do. So, of course, we've sent a lot of information out to the public in terms of the ballot for this measure, and City Clerk has received any protest ballots, and I'd like her to review the results of the protest election this time.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we've received 11 letters of protest in front of you tonight. Only 11.
That would be out of our total number of customers is about 5,000. So, I'm sorry, about 10,000. Excuse me. And so we would recommend approval of the sewer rate increase at 7% for 2009 and 10, Mayor and council members, unless there are any further questions.
Okay. Questions for Robert?
I do. In the report, you talk about the pacing of increases and that this is a one-year increase, and that the reason we're doing 1 year is because it's difficult to know what pace of capital financing is going to be required for the project. So 2 questions. Well, I guess the primary one, though, is do we have any control? I mean, I know we're a member of the SBSA. So what control does San Carlos or the SBSA have over those capital financing requirements in the long run? I mean, are we always going to be slave to that decision of that body?
I would say we have little control. It is decided by it's called the board. It's the commission of the Joint Powers Authority, of which one of you is appointed to that commission as Mayor Grisilli at this time. And so through the mayor, you do have some say, although San Carlos has a minority vote in that. It's weighted basically by population. And the other parties are Menlo Park, Redwood City, Belmont, and so we're a fairly small percentage.
So, and also capital projects take a while to get underway. So do we have any estimate we know this year, but there's nothing to report about the following year or the year after that. Do we have any information on what the plans are for the following years and how that might affect our rates as well?
Well, the SBSA Commission has authorized certain capital projects to go forward. Mm-hmm. And I've asked the SBSA staff to give me a financial summary of where we are on those, and I haven't seen that yet.
I think, because if I'm not mistaken, it was a similar question I had before. It's just, what's the pacing of this stuff? It's just 1 year at a time.
Yeah, so some of this, to answer some of your question, some of it's also based on the financial situation of the country, because we have to be able to sell the bonds.
I understand.
So
the SBSA has to be able to sell the bonds. Yes.
So at one point, about 3 or 4 months ago, we were going to go on a certain pace. And because of the way the financial markets reacted in the last quarter of 2008 and are acting now, we're slowed down a bit. That doesn't mean we're not planning out. I don't have the exact thing, as Robert doesn't either. We have a meeting tomorrow morning. I'd be happy to get that list tomorrow, not tomorrow, Thursday morning we have a meeting at 8 o'clock. And I'll be happy to get that list if Robert doesn't get it before then and make sure it's available to the council, what the plan is today for what the timing of these things are.
Marching forward at an uncertain pace.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, because obviously there's limits to how much we can and will approve as far as fees and rates. Right. Does the SBSA take that under consideration as they're approving?
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, the key thing is we're doing lots and lots of planning now, lots and lots of planning, because you can't do it. It's a $350 million, the whole thing, this project. That's going to take over the next 10 to 15 years to do. So it's front-loaded. It was planned to be front-loaded in the first 5 or 6 years, a majority of that money, and then it sort of slides down. Okay. And so, but with the economic situation, that may be extended out relative to what we're going to do. So I'd love to be able to be specific on the answer. Unfortunately, it's very vague at this point because it's got a lot of moving parts.
It's a dynamic equation, but any context for us would be great.
I will Thursday morning make sure that I get something back so that all of us get an idea of what the plan today is of how we're going to do it.
Thank you very much.
One other point of information on that is that the economic stimulus program that's pending in Congress does provide additional financing for water and wastewater utilities. Now, it is in the form, rather than of grants, as the original plan was, it's in the form of low-interest loans. But I've talked to Dan Child, the SBSA general manager, and he's been very actively involved in looking at what financing opportunities there are there. And it does look promising in that the agency would be eligible for these state revolving fund loans, which are the ones to be receive financing through the economic stimulus package, where they were not eligible before. And that would, and the result of that would be to lower the financing costs and, of course, then the impact on the ratepayers.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Grocott?
Yeah, excuse me, one question I have is, I suppose these rates are based on a certain number of ratepayers.
Yes.
And, we have projects that could come online. Maybe this is already figured into it. What comes to mind, for instance, is 1,000 El Camino. Mm-hmm. But as other ratepayers come on board, does that then impact these rates? Could they possibly go down at all? Or you also talked about if we get the low-interest loans, I suppose this is all based on a certain kind of rate.
Yeah, I would say, I think what you're referring to is what you call the rate base, the base of rate-paying customers.
Right.
And it's this financial model assumes that the rate base will be fairly level. Even with a project like 1,000 El Camino Real, which is 90-some ratepayers, I mean, that's a very small percentage of the number that we have. Other factors, for example, we've read in the Chamber newsletter about the LG Communications, how they've actually remodeled their plant and eliminated a lot of wastewater flow. That actually reduces our rate base, even though we haven't lost a customer. Mm-hmm. So there are some variations, but they're pretty marginal. Okay. And I would say that it's a fair assumption to assume that the rate base will be fairly stable.
And then the other question I have is, if we were to be sensitive to the community, and yes, we only received 11 letters. I don't know if there's ever been a Prop 218 process where you get 50% plus one marching into council chambers and saying we're not going to pay this. I think there's some. It's a nice process. It was when it was put in place, I think it was mindful of the public, but I don't personally. I think it really doesn't work to go through this process. And one could say that for every letter that we received, there's probably 10 people who felt the same way who didn't bother to write a letter. So in being sensitive to the citizens of San Carlos and some of the content of these letters, which are saying, look, you guys, there's other things that are going to be coming our way too. The school's planning on putting something on the ballot. The governor's talking about, sales tax increase and so forth. My question is, could we cut the baby a little bit here? Could we go for a little bit less of a rate increase, but not hurt ourselves too badly, and change the numbers just a little bit?
As discussed in the staff report, the alternative is to either eliminate this rate increase or reduce it, and that would basically you'd be absorbing the financial impact of this debt financing for SSBSA out of your sewer reserves. Mm-hmm. So it's about $500,000 a year in financing costs, and you have about $1 million in reserves. So you could choose to do that for a couple of years.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we would cut it down completely, mm-hmm. But for instance, if we went from, it's probably more. What's the word I'm looking for? It's probably more of a show of concern than anything really substantial. But if we went from 7% to 6%, mm-hmm. and then maybe instead of taking in what I think you had in here about 558, maybe we take in 500 or something, mm-hmm. and so we have to pick a little bit out of a reserve, but not entirely, not to where we can't do anything. Mm-hmm. I suppose we could do that.
You could do that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Comments?
Through the chair. There's a couple of things. One is we can establish the rate as it is and then choose at a later date not to assess at that full amount. You've got that authority. The issue here, though, is we know that this is only going to collect enough money for the first phase. We know that there will be additional costs coming down the road that we will have to finance. And so, as you might recall, when we put this before you previously, we actually outlined the potential for having 5, 6, 7% increases per year for 10 years or more. That is the long-term implication that we're facing in order to rehabilitate this particular plant. And so by cutting the rate today would simply indicate that you would either exhaust your reserves, which puts you in a precarious position if you have any kind of an emergency, or secondarily, you'll have to increase. You're just deferring the burden to future generations, which is what really has happened to this generation currently with this plant. And so this is an attempt to put a plan in place to have those annual increases sufficient to keep the system operational.
Thank you. Mr. Monti, comment? Questions?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to be in favor of the plan as proposed. I think there are a number of services we can talk about and a number of taxes and fees we can deal with trying to reduce, but I don't think anybody's going to get away from the fact that we got to flush. And if the toilets don't work for a day, we've got a riot on our hands. So the idea of depleting resources for what I would consider a truly mission-critical infrastructure, I really don't want to mess with that. We're still in the flood season. We're still in the rainy season, so the opportunities for things to go bad is high.
Okay.
So
thank you. Commissioner Royce, comments, questions?
Yeah. So my initial reading of the agenda item, 7% increase, $500 annual sewage rate, $35 appears reasonable. I know a new management team, Dan Giles, has taken over the operation there, and he's doing a great job, and he is new. But when I pulled my chair back and started thinking about sewage and waste, I think we council, and for dry waste, garbage and recycling, we've put a lot of effort in the city, and the people have done a great effort. A lot of communication, outreach, recycling, diversion rates, doing what we think how we could drive the cost down and still do what environmentally is best for Earth, and that's where all the recycling comes in. When I look, short term, 7%, yeah. Long term, this is $300 million. Our portion's about 15%, $45 million investment, not expense. It's a capital investment for a very, very important product, sewage. However, it's a big number, $45 million, and I just really want. And Mr. Childs came a couple of months ago. I was hoping that he would be here tonight. We have a 2-page report. It's well done, but when I think about the paper and the visits and the tours that we do for our dry waste, I'd like to see more with our wet waste regarding information and data. I'd like to see benchmarking. I'd like to see what other cities around the country are paying for rates. I'd like to see a much more of a plan when it's ready for the capital improvements and how it's going to infect our citizens long term over the next 10 years for sewage rates. And then you get into the last part of my comments. I don't know what this brochure. I was really glad to see that there's an outreach program to communicate, because as a kid, I do remember changing an oil in my car. I won't admit where I put that oil, but you could imagine. Now we need to be careful where we put oil. And like you say, for grease, I hear rice is bad. Having taken a tour of the facility, I hear floss really raises heck with some of the pumps and so forth there. There's been some communication U.S.-wide on pills, medications, and so forth. But very interesting, just one example to show you how we need to work together and do more thinking about wet waste is what we're doing for our dry waste. We have a program starting called Food Scraps. And if I was to ask and walk around and knock on doors and ask if you have a garbage disposal and what you put down it, and 6 months from now ask you, why are you putting anything down your garbage disposal? Most things that go in your sink should probably go in food scraps and be recycled, along with greenery, which is what we're trying to do with our city. And so putting grapefruit rinds or other things down the sink, or I hear there's an amazing number of items that go down the county jail on what goes down their toilets when they flush. I do really think we need to just do more planning. I'd like to see more data. I'd like to get more people that really know the business of what should go down our drains and our toilets to come and talk to us so that we could have a very good long-term plan that is cost-efficient and environmentally sound. And up to yesterday, I haven't seen that. As of today, you had a brochure, excellent, but let's do more for the good of the globe and the good of our city.
I agree entirely. Okay. The sanitary sewer management plan that I mentioned is a state requirement, and it's kind of making all sanitary sewer operators, whether they be colleges even or jails, manage their system and get the word out to the public on what they should.
And if you could pass on to Mr. Childs, before any other rate approvals, I'd like to see, in fact, I would request a much more longer-term plan that we could communicate to our citizens for rates.
I'll go pass that along.
All right, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak tonight? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Mr. Grocott? All
Aye.
those against or?
Sorry.
Aye. Okay.
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Rubens, how am I doing so far?
Perfect.
Perfect. Great.
He only asks when he's doing it right.
Yeah, I only ask when I'm doing it right.
Degree of difficulty
Okay.
2.0.
Very good. I'll see what. Okay, the alternatives available to City Council approve the first reading of the ordinance to increase sewer rates in the city of San Carlos. Assume that's the next step we take. Is there a motion to approve that?
Mr. Mayor, I move for the approval of ordinance number,
Introduction
introduction of ordinance number,
1408.
ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos amending section 13.08.250 of the Municipal Code, sewer service charges and fees.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, moved and seconded to introduce ordinance number 1408. Any more discussion on this item? Hearing none. Ms. Boland?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Item 10, unfinished business. Item 10A, consideration and selection of development partner for potential development of Wheeler Plaza, generally bounded by Walnut, Cherry, San Carlos Avenue, and Laurel Streets. This is continued from February 12, 2009. Is there a staff report? Or not report, but sort of a staff
Recap.
You had a chance to look at it. Just for the record, not that Mr. Ahmad couldn't say it, but Mr. Ahmad was not present for this, but he reviewed the tapes and is up to speed on all of this. So thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. The selection of a development partner to develop with the City of San Carlos at Wheeler Plaza is an early step in a renewed effort that started in the late 90s. And as you know, a selection committee was formed earlier this year and opted to recommend a much higher level of public review for this development team interview process. And that was due to the high profile nature of this process and also to be transparent. And usually this is a process where staff would make the recommendation to the City Council. So following a rigorous process, the selection committee recommended that the City Council do the interviews of the two development teams, and that happened on January 26th. So at that meeting, the City Council interviewed the two development candidates, and they were Intercore and Silverstone Communities. And also, these two development teams answered questions at that meeting. And I'd like to point out that and I think it's really important to note that this evening's proceedings are not about the selection of a project or a set of design plans. None of that has been developed at this point. There's no design plans or drawings done at this point. Tonight's proceedings are simply to select this development partner, to partner with the city on the early stages of this process. So it's very, very early in the process. Now, if a development team is selected, staff would bring back an exclusive right to negotiate to the City Council at a later date. And following that, the city staff and the development team would engage the community on a very rigorous community and collaborative outreach program. We would talk to property owners and businesses and the chambers of commerce and the rest of the community about this before it went anywhere. Now, there was also a couple of questions. So, as the mayor noted, this was brought back to make sure the whole council was here this evening to make this selection or at least discuss it. But there was a couple of other questions that came out from the council. One was to check back with the references of these two developers, to talk to them about the other cities, if they had had any experience with similar parking issues or business retail issues around the development like we have with Wheeler Plaza. And so Mark Sawicki did make those phone calls, and I think he would like to add something to that.
Thank you. I actually spoke with half dozen city planners and staff prior to our last meeting. Since the last meeting, I've spoken to another half dozen neighbors of projects of the two development teams. Each of these projects have very unique characteristics where they're located and unique solutions as well to some of the things that came up. Some of the highlights, though, for Intracore, project in San Francisco that has a lot of retail restaurants around it. They actually had a neighboring business that had a common wall with them. All of those that I spoke to had positive things to say. Some of the highlights with regards to parking in particular, they were able to get the meters pulled during construction, so it allowed for more flexibility with parking near the site. They used the alleyway next to the building for their laydown, so it didn't disrupt a lot of the through streets. For Silverstone, I spoke to a neighbor of the project, said that business was fine throughout. They couldn't have been more accommodating. They had a concern about noise early in the morning. This was actually a hotel next door. They spoke to them about it, and they started later. Another was a situation where there was a neighboring development that had a sound wall and a 4-foot setback from the property. The developer could have taken down that wall and built right up 4 feet closer. They chose to instead give that property back to the neighbors and keep the sound wall. So again, very accommodating all across the board. Those were the remarks that I got, including some which said, it's going to be disruptive. You have to understand that. There's no way that you can have a development next door without there being some disruption. But in both cases with both developers, they had glowing remarks about how they were accommodating. That was their MO, as one of them remarked.
Okay, thank you.
And so with that, it's recommended that you deliberate about the selection of a final selection of one of the two development candidates this evening, and then, if so, suggest that we go back and prepare an exclusive right to negotiate to deliver to you at a future meeting. And that concludes the staff report.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Okay, this is not a public hearing, but I do have a speaker card. So, and if anyone else is wanting to speak on this item, Robert Stafford.
Good evening, Mayor Vasili, members of the council. I think tonight presents a tremendous opportunity to start to come up with an equation of what does it mean to have a sustainable community. Wheeler Plaza exemplifies this opportunity more so than any other spot. When you look at what does it mean to have a sustainable community, strong schools, a safe town, well-maintained. What does that require? A tax base. Where are we going to get the tax base from in an era where everything's shrinking? We can't count on the feds, the states, or the county. We have to look inward, and we have to look at Wheeler Plaza really as part of the solution. When you look at the viral changes that are taking place in our community, from a Hummer on Laurel Street to a smart car a few years later, this is where things are going. What type of developments bring the community together? Transit-oriented developments do. They have a very strong tax base, a low use on schools, in fact, almost negligible. The infrastructure is set up for the development, and it really attracts folks who are going to the paradigm shift of looking at transportation not as the anomaly, but as an integral part of our life. For this demographic, it's truly cool not to commute. When you look at the city's efforts to really bring clarity and transparency to the development process, I think we can look to the good job that the GPAC committee is doing to date. From my perspective, we're actually downzoning at a time when we should be doing the opposite. But I think we can look at the city's goals and interests with the GPAC guidelines and get to our goal of a sustainable community. I urge the council and the community to consider the context of the challenges we have today with the limited ability we have to influence our tax base. Wheeler Plaza was named after Ed Wheeler, who was a police chief, fire chief. Imagine that. He played both roles at the same time. He lived just one block from here. What would he say today to a community that's pulling one way or the other? Or would we say we can pull together on this? I think this is really our time to pull together, and I encourage you folks to look at really the highest density that Wheeler will support that's sensitive to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? All right. Gentlemen, we have to pick somebody. We don't have to pick anybody. We can do whatever we want. So, Mr. Ahmad, you ready to go?
I am. I did want to thank the rest of the council for waiting up for me. So I did go through the tapes and had a couple of things I wanted to bring up. First of all, in looking at the previous packet, I wanted to bring out this one sentence about project rationale. It says, Wheeler Plaza presents a unique catalyst opportunity for the continuing success and resiliency of downtown. Through mixed-use development, there is a potential to add new life to the area while maintaining the character and integrity of the downtown. I think that is a critical portion to say that maintaining the integrity of downtown. This may sound oblique, but I do want to stress this point. I spent several years working in an emergency room and got pretty good at sutures. And still remember there was this one med student fell after, I think, having a few too many beers, cut himself in the face, and it was my turn to do sutures. So I sewed up his face. The next week, a 6-year-old girl had an issue where she fell on her bicycle, had the same kind of cut. It was my turn to suture, and the doctor on call said, nope, we're going to get somebody from plastics in. And his comment was very specific. He said, no, this is a little girl's face. This is really important. We don't mess with something like that. Laurel Street is not an economic engine for San Carlos, but we've got to look at it as a little girl's face. This is the face of San Carlos, and it's something that we want to take extreme care to protect. I heard terms of density and setbacks. What can we do for green buildings? What can we do for open space? Look for additional funding sources. I think a term that I want to clearly use if we look at a project here is the term elegant, because it's one word that an engineer will understand. If you tell an engineer you want something beautiful, it goes over their head. But if you say elegant, oh, now I understand what you're saying. There will likely be some impacts for people who will be around the area during construction. I think it's in everybody's interest to minimize it. In listening to the discussions from the two groups, it is clear that they are both eminently qualified and have the financial backing to do so. The thing that I'll go ahead and state a preference. I did like Intracorp. If I look in their first page of their report, it sort of struck a theme that I heard throughout. When Intercorp begins a project, we always start with a visioning meeting, comma, a discussion with the community. The success of this project depends on community involvement and making certain that the issues are heard from the community. I think I got the notion that they understood the word partner, and I feel comfortable moving forward with this. To summarize, I think this could be an incredibly exciting project for San Carlos. I would love to see it move forward, and I'll go ahead and put my support behind Intercorp.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grocott?
Well, I guess, I would like to have some discussion from the council. And I purposely did not ask this of staff. I want to ask council members because I think it's important. And I think it's important for us to speak to the community about what it is we have in mind here. Usually when these processes get started, they become like a snowball. And the question of no project is out the window. So that's usually how it happens. Now, if I remember correctly, when we were in retreat, we talked about, well, let's get a decision on Wheeler. Are we going to do it or are we not? And if we're not, let's take our money, which actually, quite frankly, the city manager has hinted around at this, that, look, you've got all this money wrapped up in Wheeler Plaza with, $1 million properties that we purchased, the RDA money, and you either keep it there and do the project, or you don't, and you take that money, you divest yourself, and you go someplace else. I can tell you, so that was the discussion we had at the retreat, was let's get something out there so we can make a decision. And I want to be sure that if that's what we're doing here, if we're moving forward to choose a developer so that they can come back and show us some proposals, and we can say, yeah, we like these proposals, we're going to do a project, or we can still say, and I don't want this to be glib to say this next part, but we could say, you know what, we've seen it, now we get the idea of it, and thank you, Mr. Developer, but we don't want to do anything. Is that still on the table? I would really like to know. I'd really like to have some feedback from the council, because I just heard from Mr. Ahmad that, it's a great idea, let's do it. I think a project is a super idea, let's go forward. I'm not convinced. I agree with you. Downtown is like a little girl's face. Again, our city manager, when he first was hired a few years ago, said, your Laurel Street is a gem. Don't ruin it. You don't need to do a lot. It's not a big part of your economics here, but it's a gem. And it's a face of our community. You are right. And people from up and down the peninsula recognize Laurel Street as a special place. And that's why the restaurants are busy and so forth. And I even question, why do we need to do anything there? It's a vibrant downtown. We did a few things a few years back with restaurants and parking, and what used to be a sleepy downtown that you could roll a bowling ball down at 5 o'clock and not hit anybody is now vibrant and active all the time. You go down there at lunchtime, it's busy. You go down there in the evening, it's busy. You go down there on the weekends, it's busy. The only time I've seen that it's not busy lately, that busy anyways, is Sunday evenings. I was down there yesterday, and there's some activity in the restaurants and so forth, but it's not, packed. My point partly here is that if I feel like if we do a project, we're going to ruin it. Now, I heard from the developers, hide the parking. We put this building in, and you hide the parking, and you end up with the same amount of at-grade parking as you do today, albeit it's in a structure. There's just no way around that. It's going to have to be parking that's inside some kind of structure, at least some of it. I think partly what makes the downtown so great that we have compared to other downtowns is you can find parking in a parking lot that's open air. And to me, it's not the most attractive part of the organism, but it's part of the organism. And if you take it away, you're going to hurt that organism. I'm so afraid of that I'm really not that willing to go forward with the project. When this whole thing started years ago, about 15 years ago. It started as a parking study. The argument was, as we look down the road, we see a need for parking, we should put in a parking structure. And that quickly moved into, if we're going to put in a parking structure, we got to build something else to sort of help pay for the parking structure. So let's put in retail or housing or both. And some folks sitting on that committee said, time out, I thought we were looking at parking, and now you're talking about other things. Here we are 15 years later. We have some parking issues downtown. I don't think they're that bad. I go down there at noon, and yeah, you have to drive around a little bit sometimes to find parking. I don't know. So my question, I wrap this up. What are we doing? If we choose somebody, does that mean, and if we vote to choose somebody, if I vote to choose somebody, does that mean I'm on board for a project? Or does it mean we go through the process, we get some proposals, and maybe one of the proposals is no project at all? Just like you do, when you get the environmental impact reports, it says there's project, there's a mitigated project, or a downplayed project which impacts the environment a little less, or there's no project at all. What are we doing? Because I want to know before I vote or make a choice.
Okay. Through the chair. Here I am again. She said, who are the chair?
How am I doing?
We're going to have, if and when we eventually get to an agreement with somebody, we're going to have a full environmental impact report where we're going to have on this project. Is that correct?
Well,
or some kind of an environmental impact
report.
There
will be an environmental review of the project.
Okay.
The extent of that I can't tell you.
Right, because we don't know whether it's going to be scoped or whatever, but there will be an environmental review.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I know there will be.
No, I know that, but I'm just making the point that just because I'm trying to, again, sort of answer your question, at least in my opinion, and I'm looking to staff if I'm saying it wrong, all we're doing here is taking the first step. We're not approving any project. We're not approving that we're even going to have a project. We might deal with the developer and the staff, and the developer and staff may come to at odds right away and go, this isn't going to work. They may want 160 units. We go, density is 100. That's it. End of conversation. They walk away. It's over. So there's no, to me, automatic, at least not in my mind, there's no automatic. We can sit there and say, hey, no, we're not going to do this. I mean, the parking is there, and if we have a project, if we ever do have a project, the parking is also going to be there. It's not going to be open air, but the project's also going to have the same parking. Otherwise, there isn't going to be a project, because we can't take away parking. That's too important a parcel. So that's just one person's opinion on how this is going to go and how this is. So, I mean, that's how I see it. And I think that's how staff sees it, that this is just a step in a direction to look at an option to improve Wheeler Plaza. Mr. Weiss?
Yes. I mean, I think that is a good summary. The city has been looking at various options for 10 or 15 years on this property. And certainly there is the thought that the project has some value. I would agree with the council member's comments that Laurel Street is, has a charm, has a value to the community, and yet I think that vibrance that you find with Laurel Street is a product of the improvements that have been made by generations that preceded us, with Pacific Hacienda, with the improvements to Laurel Street, with the library, with the youth center, with the various, the grade separation. These were all projects that our predecessors saw value. There was certainly opposition in the community, but they were projects that were approved by the community ultimately after thorough discussion that led to the community that you have today with the energy and the vibrance. And the question ultimately becomes whether or not what you have today can be sustained if you don't continually invest to enhance and improve. If you just rest upon your laurels and take no actions to make improvements to the area, will it still have that same kind of vibrancy, or will it be passed by communities on either side of you that have made that kind of an investment into the community? So those are issues that I think the council needs to undertake. Certainly what we're asking you tonight is to simply pick a partner that you would formulate plans with. There's no obligation from the action that you take tonight to approve a project. Certainly you might get to a point and say, well, if it's going to require 160 units and in order to get what we want out of it, we don't want to go down that path. You certainly have that option to do that at a later date. But getting to the council member's point, if you know at this juncture that no housing units are acceptable or 50 or 60 units maybe are not acceptable to you, you may not want to go down this path. I mean, if no development is acceptable to you, if no investment into that community or into that project area is acceptable to the council, then there's no need to go through this process. We have some sense from the last 10 or 15 years of study and review. We have some sense as to the parameters. You've heard it from the various people that made proposals on this site. And if you know at this juncture that none of those concepts are going to be acceptable to you at the end of the day, then yeah, we're wasting our time here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Appreciate it. Okay. Mr. Lewis? Well, I guess a couple of, and has the chamber weighed in on the idea of a Wheeler Plaza development, by the way?
I don't know that the chamber, as an entity, certainly we've had communications with the chamber. There have been questions raised that in correspondence, actually, that's been submitted to us, raising a series of questions, and so they're certainly aware. The CEO of the, albeit I think she submitted her correspondence as an individual, not as an actual chamber rep, but we certainly have had dialogue and communication with them in terms of questions and concerns that they have about the project moving forward, things that we need to address. But I don't believe that they've taken a formal position, yea or nay, on the project as a whole.
Right. You know, for where I understand we are in the process, just to go to your point, is that, you know, tonight this is about choosing, this is a request for proposal, so we're trying to request a company that can come back with a proposal that's going to be acceptable to council and acceptable to the public. It hasn't gone through any public vetting process at this point. And of course, we're not going to move forward without extensive public input, trying to get an idea for the public's interest in this. I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of embrace the change that we see as good for the future of the community. And, you know, I happen to think that this is a change that is for the good of the future of the community. Now, I won't go so far as to use Councilmember Ahmad's oblique reference to your medical history or performance, but I will say that there's not a soul that lives in this town that doesn't relate to the village feel of San Carlos and doesn't love that. And I think all of us, in proceeding at all, have a similar sense of caution that you have with change, and we don't want to mess with that feel. On the other hand, I also believe with the public speaker tonight, Mr. Stafford, in talking about there is some paradigm shifting that needs to be done in order to be sort of responsibly grow. And I think this project can be one of them. It is transit-oriented development. It is a good, I think, for condominium living near downtown. I think it's a good, the LEED certification, both these firms, as far as the possibility of being a green project, are both really positive. And I think, I also think there is room for expansion on Laurel Street to the south as well. That could be more vibrant and create an even greater atmosphere than we have today. So for me personally, I would like to see something happen with Wheeler Plaza. I think it would be good for retail. I think it would be good for community for us. And I think it can be good for the housing community as well. As to tonight's particular decision, I mean, I think we have two really good companies here. Here's a couple things I'm interested in council bounce back and discussion, maybe not just all individual comment and vote just how we see it. I thought both were good presentations. Here's just, you know, to give a certain prism on these not on the presentations, but the proposals, just to think about, and I'll be interested where everybody comes in on this. The Silverstone communities roughed out around 110 to 120 units. The Intercorp, I think, said 135 to 165 units in the proposal. I think that when I asked the folks from Intercorp about that, they did say there's flexibility there, just there's some price point differences and so forth, and they'd work with the community on that. I would say, again, at a glance, the team from Silverstone has done more small-town development, medium-sized, San Carlos-sized town developments. On the one hand, that's a potential strength in working with local downtown members and councils and a public like the San Carlos public, so they may have a little bit more experience in moving projects along like that. On the other hand, with Intracorp, although they've worked in larger cities, they may not have that same experience, but there's perhaps a little bit, the architectural design seemed to have greater breadth to it. And I personally feel that a lot of our communities are starting to look an awful lot alike with some of the architecture and so forth. So I feel like Intracorp has some pretty interesting designs, and they also have a very effective team. But I think there's maybe a hair less experience in smaller communities, and a little bit different sense of design and architecture. But I think they're both really strong. So I'm sort of curious to hear what other council members feel about some of the presentations, if there's another prism that I hadn't thought of. But I think we're in pretty good shape with either. And again, just to emphasize, next step is a proposal, and start to hear some of the community's feedback on this. And, we're ultimately agents of what we think is positive change for the community and for the city, and so continue to listen to that. And going forward, we'll have a lot to do with that, but I'm personally interested in it.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. Vice Mayor Royce.
Yeah. So the mayor and I, of course, were part of the interview team of talking to all 12 of the developers. What was interesting is one of the developers, just without even interviewing or talking to them, just going through the material and seeing examples of work that they've done, I had ranked number one. The other one here this evening, I ranked in the middle of the pack. However, Silverstone, who was in the middle of the pack, jumped to the platform during the interview. I think John and his team did an exceptional job. And like other council members have talked about, we have two exceptional firms that will be able to do a great brainstorming and potential of what we could do if we want to in our city. A couple of features that lead me to Intercorp as still my number one are these reasons. One, and it may not be fair, but there is a much closer understanding of our city, and part of that is the experience of the team. They were more prepared on not only Wheeler, but the adjacent areas of Wheeler and other businesses. But the one feature that drew me stronger was that the presentation was from the entire team. I felt connected not only with the principal, but all of the members of the team. The entire team was there. They all shared thoughts. They all answered questions. So communication was really important to me, and I felt that I can communicate with the team, with the entire team, and that was pretty important. And the other feature, in looking at Silverstone, and again, I'll speak highly of both of these firms, but the only part that was a concern in either of these two, but it hit with Silverstone, I'm sorry to say, was some of the design work of examples of buildings that they've done. One is within our town, one is in an adjacent city, Redwood City. But a very important thing, I think Councilmember Grocott talked about it in our first discussion, was the setbacks and so forth. And I think that is going to be very important based on experience in the city. And I saw a little bit too much in your face at street level of past examples that they've done. So I'm trying to speak honestly. I hope you appreciate that. Nothing against you, but both of you should be proud. But at this point, I'm tending towards Intercorp for the fit-in, the communication that I'm looking for in somebody to do a good job for us.
Okay, thank you. And to prove that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I looked at both these proposals, and as Vice Mayor Royce said, we spoke to, we heard a number of proposals. We had some terrific interviews with the developers, and we narrowed it down to these two. It was a consensus of the committee, myself, Vice Mayor Royce, Mr. Sawicki, Mr. Savay, and our consultant. As Councilmember Lewis indicated, I'm also a proponent of housing near the downtown and transit, trying to keep people out of their cars so they can walk to services, and I think Pacific Hacienda is a great example of that. And I think the future holds for us, quite honestly, a lot more Pacific Haciendas, not necessarily for San Carlos if they choose not to, but for our society. I think that it's the future of what we're going to be doing. We are going to be a lot more integrated in a smaller area relative to our energy needs and relative to a lot of other services. Both proposals are going to keep parking. We are not giving up the parking that we have there. I know some people think that we're going to lose parking. We're not losing a single space, at least not on this man's vote. Looking at the two proposals, I thought the density, and again, there are always gauges of range. I thought the density should be a little less than a little more, which gives an edge to perhaps Silverstone, at least in their proposal. That doesn't mean that Intracorp couldn't lower that either. Again, looking at different projects that were being built, I believe the smaller projects are the ones that Silverstone builds, as opposed to the larger projects, as Councilmember Lewis said, in larger cities. There was mention of government money. There was mention of grants. There was mention of this. There was mention of that. I'm not sure that the city is basically in the financial business. In the Silverstone proposal, there wasn't any of that. It was basically that Silverstone was going to find the financing and do all of that without necessarily our participation or our effort. I believe that the Intracorp team is as Vice Mayor Royce said, is a good team of capable people, and they were all there to speak to it. But we have to choose one or the other, and I think, at least in my situation, I think tonight I'll be voting for the Silverstone group. So, comments, Mr. Grocott.
Thanks for coming back.
Absolutely, we'll always come back.
So I am concerned about the snowball effect, that once we get this going, and it sounds like, just listening to the council members tonight, my other council members here, there's a bent towards building new housing in the downtown. I don't think we need that. I think, I would take a much slower approach. I don't even think we need to be doing anything with this site right now, except maybe beautifying it a little bit. But we've got 1,000 El Camino that's going to come online. I think, if I were doing this alone, I would watch what happens there. And, the argument for that project was, let's add vibrancy to the midsection of town. Okay, let's watch and see. It's an experiment. Let's see what happens.
Okay, I'll let you finish.
The other area that we've got a project somewhere out there is the Joint Powers, Samtrans, Caltrain. That right of way. They're going to build housing. And as the city manager alluded to, we've had projects around the downtown, not necessarily right in the downtown, except for the spruce up we did of the first 3 blocks of Laurel. One could say that added vibrancy. I think the biggest thing that added vibrancy was a change in policy on parking relative to restaurants. But so I'm moving very cautiously, and I'll repeat what I said before. And I so far haven't seen too much of it. In fact, I think our own staff said it was impossible. But what I stated before, I'll state again. We're going to lose a community asset, in my mind. You can convince me that we'll have the same number of parking spaces, and I believe you. If we had less, you would not go forward with it.
I wouldn't.
And I understand that, but they are not going to be an open-air parking lot, and there's a difference there. And to me, that's a community asset.
Through the chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
About tonight's.
I know.
I'm just, you're repeating a couple of points, and I'm just trying to get to, I'm not sure you're going to come down on the side of one of these guys or the other, or are you just saying you're not in?
I'll get to it.
Okay.
Thank you. The community asset that I do not want to see us lose is this open-air parking. But if we have to lose it, and if we're going to go forward with a project, and if it's going to happen, the community asset that I see us gaining out of this, again, is some significant place where we can meet and do things, like the farmers market. So all of that said, I'm going to move forward cautiously, and I will tell you that in this process, the only firm that met with me individually, and I guess with all the other council members, took the time out of their day to meet me at the plantation and have a cup of coffee and talk, was Silverstone. So if we're going to move forward, and if I'm going to go with any one of these, I'm going to go with Silverstone.
I mean, I respect all your comments, and believe me, I think all of us respect your comments. What we're trying to do is basically move forward cautiously, because I don't think, as Mr. Weiss said, I don't think our society is going to be able to be static. I mean, it would be great to be static in all of this stuff, but I really believe that we need to at least look at this. When 1,000 El Camino is going to come on in the next 3 to 4 months, I believe, okay? This project, even if we started today, would be at least 2 to 3 years away, Mr. Savay, at least 3 years away, I would think. At least 2 years away. So I think there's enough lead time, even if all the things were together. And there's no guarantee that the staff and whoever developer we pick are going to do that. I mean, there really isn't. Because I've seen that before, being in this business, where you work with city and you want to do something, and it just doesn't work out. It just, both sides can't make it. So I appreciate your comments. So anyway, Mr. Lewis.
And I will say, too, I completely respect your comments, Matt. That's why I tried to address them in my comments. I just wanted to, I just wasn't sure whether you were leading up to.
I was coming around.
Aaron, I know. I was just.
Okay, so
I apologize for that. I would, because it sounds like we've got a couple for Silverstone and a couple for, Mayor Grisilli, you brought up the financing element. That was one other thing that I did want to mention. I did think that in the Silverstone group that they had, that there was self-financing. It didn't seem like the city was going to be it was a little stronger in the financing aspect of things. And given the current credit market, I think that's another criteria that speaks on behalf of Silverstone.
Okay, well, gentlemen, if we have some consensus, I need a motion to want for one or the other to see if it has the necessary. And we need 3 votes, Mr. Rubens, for this. Okay? All right.
Correct.
All right. Is there a motion for one company or the other?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move for the approval of Intercorp.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
I'll second that.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded for Intercorp. Any further discussion on this?
Mr. Mayor, there was a question, and again, I was watching things remotely, but and I would like to get just the general thoughts from the dais. My feeling was that Silverstone had, to some extent, a standard product and a standard size that they tended to build. And so when I was looking at them, my question was, could they really think out of the box, or was their box about that size? That's a point of hesitation for me in Silverstone. I was curious if there's other remarks.
In terms of the question whether they can think out of the box, I think both firms, from what I see, can think out of the box. And certainly staff is there to help them to think out of the box, too. So I think that both firms are equally balanced in that way.
Yeah, I think
good teams.
I think, Mr. Savay, you've made a great point. Again, we're looking at this, we're going to pick one, but it's a partnership here, and staff is going to weigh in extremely heavily on how this is going to look and what it's going to look like if it ever comes to fruition. So I think it's not just, well, here's what we do, and this is it, this is good luck, and that's it. So
Understood.
Whichever one.
Okay.
So there's a motion on the floor for Intercorp. We have second. Any more discussion on this? Okay, I'll call for the roll call, please.
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Lewis?
No.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
No. Apparently that motion fails. Do I hear another motion?
I'll make a motion to forget the language for Silverstone communities.
Okay.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to have Silverstone Communities begin discussion with the City of San Carlos on a possible development at Wheeler Plaza. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Boland?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Definitely yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right. So, staff, you have marching orders, and we'll see what we come back with. When do you just anticipate coming back at the next juncture with, in probably 90 days or 120 days? Or?
Within 60 to 90 days, yeah.
All right.
We'll
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for the measured discussion on all this, and we'll see what we have. Moving on, item 10B, quarterly financial reports.
Good evening again, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. On the agenda tonight are the first two of the brand-new quarterly financial reports, quarters 1 and quarters 2. As we talked about earlier, this financial report is the development and outgrowth of the Finance Ad Hoc Subcommittee. And wait a second. Sorry. Room to clear out. That's okay.
Taking a 30-second break here while we...
It's a large contingent. I didn't realize I was here for that item. Okay, we'll get going again. The first two quarters, quarter 1 and quarter 2 of the new financial report, I'd like to make a special thanks to Vice Mayor Royce. This is his child. Rebecca Mendenhall, the city's finance officer, and I helped bring it to life, but the vision here was clearly from the Vice Mayor. We worked hard to develop, through multiple drafts, a report that would provide an executive summary to the City Council of the current financials. It looks at quarter to quarter versus budget versus a year ago to give the council some idea of some comparison about where we are. These particular reports right now are focused on the general fund, and it's our intention that most likely the focus of this report will be on the general fund. However, with the caveat that if there were to be significant financial activity or changes to report from another fund, you would see those pop up in this report as well. Looking at the first two quarters specifically, we can see fairly stable property tax, and we believe that that will continue to hold true. We can begin to see the trouble of the sales tax a little bit in quarter 1, a little more in quarter 2. You will definitely, I think, see it in quarter 3. Report showing us coming in under budget by a few $100,000 in sales tax. In terms of the other categories, we look relatively stable, but there are some areas of concern. TOT, which you'll hear more about at the mid-year budget, which is in the other revenues. We have recent data, even newer than the second quarter report coming out in a couple of days. That'll be reflected in the third quarter report, although you will hear about it in more detail in a couple of weeks at the mid-year. These reports really are designed to help you track, where we're at versus budget versus a year ago, what those anomalies are, and whether or not to provide any direction or begin discussion on making some changes early on. Our hope is that this will help develop your understanding of the city's finances, help provide 4 new touchstone opportunities in the year to raise questions to staff or talk with your colleagues on the council about the data, about where we are and what it means, and to possibly redirect and those kinds of things. It's really my take on the report. I'm sure Vice Mayor Royce would like to add something about the report.
Yeah, if I could just, a couple of requests. It would be one is, since this is the first time we've looked at the report as a group here, our intent, of course, is to focus 80-20, 80% on the format, the report itself, maybe 20% on the content, the financial analysis, analyzing deviations and so forth. So mostly we are interested overall on your overall general comments. If you think this has value added, it does take resource time and work, but if there's value added to you, and then secondly, any specific shifts, it's a living document. We could always add things. There's certain things that the Finance Committee would like to add to the report. that aren't included here, but we will be doing overtime. But any input you have in the interim, you could pass those on to Jeff, and we'll look at making continual improvements to the report. The only other really quick item is I did have a discussion with Jeff this morning. On this report, there are some deviations due to timing differences. For example, we prepaid fire a week, so it got into 1 month. We had basically 4 months of fire in a 3-month quarter. With the use of accrual accounting and prepaids and so forth, we're hoping to hopefully reduce some of the deviations and so forth. There are some strict rules. We're not on a real accrual basis of accounting. It's kind of a modified accrual so still the sales tax, a property tax, until it's certain and measurable. There's certain terms they use. We cannot report it, but there are some improvements that we can make in the timing of expenses, which will have a little bit improvement to what you're seeing right now. But other than that, I'd like to open it up to general feelings on the report and the value added here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Royce and Mr.
And a great appreciation to Rebecca. She did about 99% of the work here, not the team. She did.
Comments?
Thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
Well, Rebecca, 99%. Congratulations. I don't know why Jeff and Vice Mayor Royce are getting so much credit here tonight. No, I'm just kidding. So this is just, does anybody else on the left to right or right to left column of this have an issue with that? This is just, we're talking about formatting here. Current year's in the middle, and then previous is on the right, as opposed to, the current being on the far right and previous being on the left. For me, I would probably flop those, but perhaps it's just because that's the way I sort of look at these things, is previous. And so that would be one comment. I'd prefer that if it worked for everybody else. The question I have, because as you guys know, I commented earlier, this is great. I love the fact that we kind of get the top 7 funds and sort of the headlines about what's been going on and so forth is really nice. Is there any room for projection in this? In other words, in this case, it's a report, and in the case of the fire, it was easy for me to find this is why it's off, and so it was nice to have that context. But when we're like second quarter, it'd also be interesting to know we're performing quarter to quarter, but here's where a projection has an influence on a particular category. It might be nice to have the possibility of a projection at the end of a given area to say these are projecting downward or forward, just because we're being a planning body. It'd be nice to know what the implication is of anything that's happening in the current quarter.
So just a quick response on that. We do have some projections in the narrative in the comments section, but not as a table. And then my only other comment would be, this, of course, is one report. As we do some of our financial reviews, for example, budgeting here in 2 to 3 months from now, that will be provided in addition to the budget and these reports. So whether or not it goes here or someplace else, I think your council member Lewis's comment is appropriate. We could definitely, we started off simple. We need to do more. I agree with that.
And like I say, it is really working for me, and being a living document is good. I think as we go through the process, as we ask questions, we might say, hey, this is worth adding or this is worth dropping. But it's straightforward to read for us, which means it's also going to be straightforward to read, I think, for the public as well. It's not as arcane to get into, so that's great. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Ahmad?
None at this time.
Okay. Mr. Grocott?
I like it very much. It's, I've served with other organizations, professional associations I've been in, and this actually looks more like what I've seen when I've been on those boards, and you get, financials. It's easy to read. It's pretty straightforward. I think even with what Mr. Lewis was talking about, to some extent you can interpret that if you look at, okay, previous year in this same quarter, this is where we were on the amount of budget that we had used. And you can look and say, well, last year we were at 8% of the budget at this point in the quarter, and this year we're at 15. What's going on? Because there are things that, like with fire, somebody mentioned fire, we get money and we spend money in jumps and starts. And so you might be, the first quarter only 10% through the budget, and you go, well, why are we only 10%? Shouldn't we be 25 or a quarter through the year? Well, it's because of the way we spend money. And you begin to learn that as you're on the board. This the way this is set up, it teaches you that, I think. And it gives you that idea a little bit about, can I forecast ahead and feel like I'm doing all right? But I agree with you. It would be a nice, I think between the two of those things, you've got some real information that you can use. The only thing I would add as a comment to this is then finding a way to put this into some of the other things we do during the year so it's not just a quarterly report. For example, sometimes I'm thinking more with engineering. They'll bring us a project and they'll say, okay, we're looking for approval on this and this is how it impacts the budget. But, we approved the budget a year ago sometimes, or 9 months ago or whatever. I want to know more, okay, if we do this project and go ahead and spend the money, what do we got left in the checkbook? Yeah, we budgeted for it, but, sometimes the money's not coming in like we expected or whatever. And so doing something as an attachment to especially a major project where we're going to spend a lot of money that's similar to this and shows us where we are, I think would also be helpful.
Comments I have, I think it's extremely useful. I appreciate the consolidation so that each of these sections only have at the most 6 or 7 lines, because I think more lines make it just absolutely unreadable in a lot of financials that I've read. I think it's the big picture. I think the percentages give you a feel. You can, it's pretty easy. First quarter, 25, 50. Again, not all these go in that section, but the bigger ones sort of do. Secondly, the information, it's key. This is the best part of it, the information below, the bullet points. That's perfect. So why is this? Well, the bullet points explains it to me. And again, we're looking at big dollars here. If it's off 100,000 or 50,000, I don't really care. I do care if it's off 2 or 3 million, and this is the big picture, and that's what I think we need to get. So I really appreciate all the work that Rebecca did, and also the work that Randy and Jeff did, and anybody else that helped. But I honestly, you give a financial report to a financial person, and sometimes it's deadly. But I really, really think that this, in a big picture thing, is really, really a great idea, especially those bullet points. That's fabulous. So, all right. Do we need what else do we need here? We need a motion. I'm sorry.
And if I could just close, this is the first time in the city's 83 years that we now are reporting in K dollars.
K dollars. Good.
Not dollars.
Let's see. What do we need? Do we need a accept the first and second? Yeah. We need to accept the first and second quarter quarterly financial reports. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Ahmad. Is there a second?
Second.
Lots of seconds. So Christine, you could pick on that one.
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Okay. All right. B2I or 2 or whatever it is. Discussion and identification of core services and new reporting format.
The core services evaluation forms that are attached are being recommended by staff for approval. We're also recommending that the council provide direction to the city manager to include those approved forms in the city's budget process. As we talked about earlier, the current strategic plan asked the council ad hoc finance committee to take a look at the budget process and see what might be done to modify it based on a whole number of issues that the council had regarding the budget process and how useful they felt it was and what its strengths were and its weaknesses were, and to find a way to augment it. And the subcommittee spent a lot of time talking about what might be done, all the various options and what those options, strengths and weaknesses, might be, because I don't think anybody yet has invented the perfect budget process anywhere. So they all come with their strengths and weaknesses in terms of trying to predict and project the expenditures and the revenues of the city into the future, and to try to prioritize the services that the organization is providing the community. And through our discussions, Councilmember Ahmad came up with, looked into his past as he's likely to do, and
hopefully not his medical past. But if this is going to go on to another story,
there's a medical reference involved.
And
I'll let him tell the story
today. But
and he suggested,
or not tell the story.
He said he only gets one story a night.
Yeah.
And he suggested this model, brought it back to the committee. The committee talked about it, tweaked it, sent it out for testing, with the building division to give it a little practical run through, and came up with this model. And in fact, there are two forms, and I'll touch a little bit in just a minute on the second form. The primary form's purpose is to help evaluate the programs that the city is currently offering, and to help rank them so that you've got sort of a uniform set of data on all the programs. Is program A mandated? Is program B mandated? How critical is program A to the community? What audience does program A and B and C serve? And how are they financed? And on, to give you some context of all the services that are being provided, so that when you see the 15% cut list that the city manager is recommending to the council, you have some data on all the city programs to help put those cuts in context, to help tell the story that sometimes maybe at the staff level we assume you understand because we work with it on a daily basis and feel like we understand it so well that, well, of course you would understand why we're recommending this program be reduced and not that program because, this program is clearly mandated or more important. This is really going to provide you, at the same time you're getting the budget data, with all this other data to help you be informed, understand why it is we're recommending those cuts, and to have the discussion that takes place amongst the council members as you prioritize those budget cuts. It's a point system. It's pretty straightforward. The staff that have used it so far found it easy to use and actually found it informative as a model to run their own programs through, that they learned something about how their programs compare to one another. The second form, the QoS worksheet, is really designed to work with those programs that are now deemed to be mandated. So the thought there being, okay, well, we've got a program that's mandated, but just because it's mandated doesn't necessarily mean that the city has to continue to provide that program at the existing level. Maybe we're providing the service at a much higher level. Something that comes to mind is building inspections or issuing of permits. We may provide them, with a shorter turnaround than most other communities, so that you could potentially reduce that service but still meet your mandate in terms of conducting those inspections and issuing those permits. And this will help to rank the mandated programs against one another in terms of the level of the quality of the service that's being provided. That's really my interpretation of the forms. I don't know if the council member or the vice mayor would like to add anything, but that's my report.
Mr. Ahmad?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, I'll just add a couple of fine points. The things that had sort of caught me off guard with the last budget process was when looking at line items, I really didn't know what was mandated, what could we talk about, what couldn't we talk about. I think there was a point where we started talking about street sweeping. Saw the budget go up and was like, well, it's mandated. No, guess what? I got a gun to my head. I think there's going to be an interesting number, and I'm willing to put a wager out there that probably north of 60% of our budget is completely mandated, that we don't have any discretion over whether we can do the program or not, but we could start to talk about quality of service. In terms of going through the scoring system, what I wanted to do was give enough points to mandated such that it is very clear this is a mandated program. Let's look at that a little differently. If it's not mandated by law, then let's start to really evaluate how is it being delivered, how critical is it, does it have competition, and what sort of involvement does the city have. The one thing that may be confusing when we talk about audience goes from 5 to 1, the entire city, every man, woman, and child, that's a 5. 3 was an interesting number, and the concept we had discussed a program, I can't remember which one, but it was addressing an audience of specifically special needs folks who really didn't have any other place to go. Then I said, okay, that's at least intent-wise was the notion of a population with unique needs. Shut-in seniors, maybe a population with unique needs, something of that nature. In terms of financial, if there's dedicated or revenue neutral, we could figure out how that works. Otherwise, is there 100% investment? That should get different points. Just moving very quickly to the quality of service, it really just asks a couple of questions that you would give maximum points to. Guys, we absolutely set the standard for the rest of the world. They all want to be us. Down to a 3, which I want to sort of, as a pounding the fist on the table saying, we meet all the requirements of the mandate, no questions. If it goes to a 2 or a 1, we've started to get questionable if we're meeting the mandate. This sheet really does put together a question: if you reduced the budget for this mandate item by X%, would you be able to meet the mandate, and what would the quality of service be? Hopefully with these 2 tools, we can start to build a picture of how we're starting to make decisions on the budget, what is available, what is discretionary, what's mandated, and what we can really afford.
Okay. Comments by any other folks? Mr. Lewis.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I work in a pet hospital, and we take care of the puppies before we...
Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, perhaps this is...
You're out of order. I have a cookie, Mr.
I have a couple of questions. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. So, to go to the thing that you just mentioned, because I don't have notes on that, I wonder if that adds up appropriately. And I guess I always wonder, any numerical system, when we can actually, humans can intervene when we just know the numbers aren't adding up in the proper way. So let me ask this. When we talk about, whether it's a service for the disabled or something like that, it's an interested party, I suppose. That would be a low number. Is that true?
No.
And in C?
In your case for C, and very specifically, there was, I think it was the group of...
population with unique needs as a 3.
And that would be the, I think we had the Disabled School Children's Program.
Right.
And I wanted to make a category that could specifically address those types of audiences.
Okay, because the only thing that I was a little concerned about is in D, criticality, I think. Is that a word? Criticality? That's this word. It's adds to the quality of life and great service to offer were kind of low. And I was wondering whether or not adds to the quality of life is a number that to me is higher than a 2. And again, this is a difficult process trying to put numbers on these things. But what I was concerned about, great service to offer, adds to the quality of life, I understand how that relates in relationship to something that's mandated and for the entire population, and it would have a lower number. But the qualitative numbers in here seem that they might be lower, and sometimes those are things that can philosophically throw things over the top. So I'm always concerned about a numerical system where, at what point can we sort of interject, and I'll just continue on this line a little bit that may help. My question is, did we take this evaluation and throw it in with some of our current services, and had it fair, number one, and then where was it wrong, more interestingly? So just not so much that this doesn't work, but we should know what the strength and weakness is of any sort of core criteria that we lay on something. So...
Well, we did test this out on all the services of the building division. That's the extent to which this has been tested so far. I think it's important for the council to look at this as a pilot program this year.
It said it was tested. It didn't say the result. That's the
the result for the building official found that it was a good assessment tool of his impression of his programs and services. As this is going to be interpreted by 6 different departments and 50 different staff members, I'm sure we're going to get a different interpretation on things like the critical nature of the service and whether or not a service is a critical support function versus a quality of life function. There's going to be, I think, some discrepancies and some learning that needs to go on with it at the staff level as we test it, but at the council level too, as you consider the data and what it means to you in the context of the budget process. So
I guess the one thing, just because it's the most knowledge I think we have, which is what our current working budget is and what these categories are, and how if we could take this and do it on previous year and just see how does that weigh out. Like, for instance, Park and Rec items to me, I'm not sure how they're going to fare in this process. So I guess what I would like to do, just personally, before we adopt this, is this is the way we're going, is maybe look at all the departments, just do a quick analysis of what we have based on this, and see how it fares.
Yeah, I don't know that we have the staff time to do that.
We need to roll it out as part of the budget now. I mean, this is actually scheduled to go out tomorrow to the departments for them to begin working on it so that it can be ready for your budget packets in April. But again, I mean, there's nothing about going through the process or looking at the data that comes in that requires the council to make your decisions based on what it is.
Jeff, I understand that. I really do. All I'm saying is, I guess if you come up with in my experience, when we come up with a new form of evaluation, we throw it against what we've already done and just sort of say, how is our current allocation, how does this reflect our current value base? I mean, decisions we've already made reflect a certain value base that we have. So, hey, if we're going to move forward, we're going to do this as we go forward. We'll use this as a comparative tool, and we'll see how it goes. I get that. I was just thought we'd vet it more completely first, but if we're running with it, I'll certainly support on this, and I think it's a good shot at it. I really do. My only thing on quality of life is, does everything have to be a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Can quality of life, can that be weighted higher? Can there be 2 3s in the same category? And that's a different sort of philosophical conversation maybe on the evaluation tool. Okay. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Grocott?
Thank you. I've had some experience using something like this because on CCAG, BPAC, we do this with projects. And it's amazing. I will say this. It's amazing. Maybe this speaks to Mr. Lewis's concerns a little bit. At first, you look at things, what am I here for? Plug this into a computer and it spits out the answer. I mean, But it's amazing how even with using numbers like this, you could score something one way. I could look at it and think it a little bit differently, and you come up with different scores. And and sometimes what we do at BPAC too is we look at the scoring and we go, yeah, that's the way it's scored, but you know what? We really want this project, so we're going to throw this away and do the human element. And I think we're still free to do that. I would hope so. We don't have to stick to the scores, right?
Yeah, there's no obligation to stick to the scoring. It's really a document designed to help the council.
Yeah,
and you may find that it groups certain programs into a category where you feel that, hey, those programs are rated too low. Not only are we not going to make that decision, but let's modify the tool now in this area for next year where we have these backwards. These need to be flipped so that it gives us our priorities as we see them.
So perhaps this is incorporated, and maybe Mr. Ahmad can help me out on this. Where would we put volunteer value? And I'll give an example. We had a couple of projects or things that we noodled on, and I think ultimately we ended up cutting them. But I remember putting into the discussion, this is a really hard thing to cut. Healthy Cities is one of them, the tutoring program. It's hard to cut something when there's no dollar. You can't really put a dollar value to everybody who volunteers, but you got all these volunteer hours. If you did put a dollar value to, let's say it's worth $50 an hour. That's in some aspect that's like found money. It's not actually money, but there's a value there. There has to be. There's people volunteering in the city of San Carlos. It builds community, et cetera, et cetera. The senior programs, same thing. Some of the senior programs, the covered program, we cut that, and yet a lot of it is volunteer based. So where does that fall in? And then I think closely related to that is there are some programs that if you have them, you can almost, well, maybe not these days, but you can almost guarantee yourself some grant funding that goes with it. So if you do away with the program, kiss the grant funding goodbye too. So how does that weigh in? Or does that come under D someplace, under 100% investment or whatever?
Mr. Grocott, I'd probably put it this way, that I completely understand your push for value, but I can't balance the budget on value. If we're investing money in any program, that actual hard dollars spent is what I wanted to capture. So if there's a program that gets $1 million of value in volunteer time, but it still costs $500,000 in hard money, that needs to be accounted for. So is it a significant investment? Is it a small investment? Is 100% of the hard dollars coming from the city? And is it a unique program? Is it, this is the only program of its kind in the city, and the only way it's going to perform is through city involvement, or are there dozens of programs like it, and we have a redundant program? So I think all those parts are shades to get us to a question of real, the real value will come in the political process of what we decide. But this is an additional tool to color where is this in the process.
So then,
but excuse me, to your point, to Councilmember Grocot's point, revenue neutral would be a 5, and if it was all volunteer and it costs us nothing, that would score 5 under Area D.
Correct.
So it'd be that would reflect volunteer.
Correct.
An engine there, right?
So if it was, a small investment.
Sure. So it would score high in that area.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Grocott.
That was it.
Okay.
I just didn't, those two things, I don't see it in here. I was seeing it maybe under D. So.
Okay. Mr. Royce, comments?
No.
Okay. My only comments are, I think, again, it's been mentioned before, I think it's a tool. I mean, I'm a numbers person, but I'm not going to vote on a budget on numbers. It's going to be gut. I think this is a great idea I sort of understand the budget line item worksheet. I'm a little bit confused, but QoS is a little scary. I have no idea what that means, but I do know what it means, but I'm not sure how it quite works. But someone's going to show me, and the staff's going to work on it, and I don't have to do the scoring, do I?
No.
Good. All right. I like that. And so I think it's going to be a good idea. I mean, I think it's great to look at other stuff, different things, how we can approach this. We do. And we may find that there's 85% of this thing is aces, 15% toss it, or vice versa. We never know. But I think I really appreciate Mr. Armand. Again, I guess all of you worked on it too, Mr. Royce and Rebecca and Jeff and everybody else to come up with some new ideas on this thing. Because there's no magic bullet. The more information we have, the more choices we have, this is great. So I think I need a motion to adopt, at least for this year's budget, how we would do this program.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Ahmad.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Grocott. Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Roy?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Thank you. Again, appreciate all the work that was put into this. Okay. We're moving to item 11, new business. Consideration of approving reimbursement agreement with 1000 El Camino Real LLC. Robert.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll keep it quick.
Thank you.
The situation addressed by this item is kind of like a home remodeling project. If you take up the carpet, you've got to do something with the baseboards. You replace them or rehabilitate them and put them back. And some things just have to go with other things. And in this case, 1000 El Camino Real is building some things. They're building bulb outs on the south side of the intersection of Laurel Street and Morse Boulevard. They're repaving half of the block of 1000 block of Laurel Street. And they're replacing some curb along Laurel Street south of their project. And so it really makes sense to build the other two bulb outs on the north side of Laurel Street. It makes sense to repair a small section of sidewalk behind that curb that's being replaced, and it makes sense to repave the other half of the 1000 block of Laurel Street. It will make a complete system of improvements. And these are things that the city had we talked earlier about improvements extending down Laurel, making some of the economic vitality at the north end go a little further south. This is a step in that direction. And so it's something that had been contemplated, at least in the capital program. And to do it at this time means there's a lot less disruption to the neighborhood because it's all done at one time. I've looked at the costs, and I think the costs are reasonable that they've come up with. There are tight controls in the agreement to make sure that there aren't cost overruns or change orders. And we only pay for what, actual costs are. So with that, I would recommend approval of the agreement, Mayor.
All right. Questions for Mr. Well?
I have a question for staff, not actually for Mr. Weil. I'm wondering if anybody is capturing all these nice stories and phrases that Mr. Weil uses. Someday you're going to retire, and we're going to need to put all those in a book. They're very nice. Thank you. You make the meeting enjoyable.
Any other comments, Mr. Grocott? Questions? Any other questions, comments? Okay, gentlemen? Okay, the only question I have is, as mentioned earlier, Ms. Grocott mentioned it. It says of the $650,000 appropriated in the budget, $490 is available. So this fits in, and we don't anticipate that we're going to have any other issues coming in the next few months. It's going to impact this because of this project, or was this anticipated?
This is, I think right at this point, we're figuring out what to do with the 490.
Okay, that'd be all right. We could save it for next year. That'd be fine. So we're doing well on that. That's the only question I have. So if there's no discussion or comments, I'll entertain a motion. Unless you have comments, Mr. Lewis, comments, questions?
No.
Motion?
So I would make a motion that we approve the recommendation of staff. Excuse me.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the reimbursement agreement that the staff has provided. Any other discussion? Ms. Bowen?
Councilmember Mott?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Roy?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Okay, thank you, gentlemen. 11B, new business, consideration of approving an application to the Local Area Formation Commission, LAFCO, for an outside sewer service requested by a property owner in Palomar Park, unincorporated San Carlos, due to a failed septic system. And look, who's back again, Robert? How are you?
Thank you. I don't have any stories on this one. But
That's sewage. You can make something up.
Yeah.
Oh.
The existing septic system at the address of 21 Estrada Place has failed. Sewage is visible on the surface, and there is a detectable odor in the neighborhood. Maybe that's why I don't have a story. And because there's a public sewer system within 200 feet of this address, the Uniform Plumbing Code does not allow it to be repaired. And the only other option for the property owner would be to pump out the system weekly, which is really cost prohibitive. If they don't do that, the home is condemned, has to be condemned. So it's a pretty significant situation for the homeowner. Now, it's not a city resident at this point, but there is a precedent for the city to accept connections in situations like this. In 2001, the septic systems had failed on 3 properties on Palomar Drive. And similarly, the properties were not found to be suitable for annexation at that time because they were not contiguous. And in that case, a sewer main was extended from the Scenic Heights County Sanitation District for those properties so they could obtain City of San Carlos sewer service. And a similar process was followed, and then an application was made to LAFCO and an agreement was put in place for outside sewer service. The staff has gone through this. Planning and Public Works and the city attorney have reviewed the current annexation and outside sewer services policies and practices. And the staff report lists the applicable general plan policies and discusses how they support the proposed action, and I won't go into detail on those. But, Mayor, if the council does wish to take the recommended action, I need to point out that there is a resolution in the packet. It got kind of buried in the item. It's right behind the map. That's in attachment 1. And the appropriate action would be to adopt this resolution. It's a resolution of application of the City Council of the City of San Carlos requesting the Local Agency Formation Commission approval for extension of sewer service outside jurisdictional boundaries pursuant to Government Code Section 56133.
Okay.
And I would recommend approval of that.
Questions for Robert?
I have a question. It says there needs to be no other on-site disposable system feasible. Why wouldn't there be some other area on the site for feasible?
Well, typically these properties,
new septic.
Typically, these properties have they're laid out to where there's really only one area for a septic field, and there's a septic field there. So because of slope and topography, and usually there's not another option.
So this current septic can't be excavated, taken out, and a new one put in and replaced?
Well, of course, the plumbing code would prohibit that.
Would prohibit it from being repaired or replaced?
I think also replaced. Yeah.
Seems odd to me. The second question I had is, if we connect, does that begin a cascade of other properties in the county now saying, oh, now we're within 200 feet, and then we're within 200 feet, and next thing you know, old Jed's a millionaire.
Well, one safeguard against that is that the public sewer main is not being extended. There would be a private sewer main extended to this house. So there won't be anybody else connecting to the sewer main.
I see, so that doesn't extend our 200 feet,
right.
that then could be connected onto. Okay.
Other questions?
I'm just curious, looking at the map, and it's probably a detail you didn't necessarily want to go into, but when you look at the map, it looks like we have to go through someone's property to connect up.
Yes, the person with the failing septic system at 21 Estrada has bought an easement through the neighbor's property.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
And this is all a work that's going to be paid for by the owner of 21 Estrada?
Yes, that's correct.
So there's no cost, all the reimbursements, all the permits, all the time we spend, it's all paid back to the city?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other discussion on this item?
I would move approval of what is it we're calling this? Recommendation or resolution authorizing an application to LAFCO.
Need a number on that, Christine?
Number 5, 2009-5.
2009-5.
9-5.
Anything else you need?
No.
Okay, there it is.
I'll second that.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on this item? All right, hearing none. Christine?
Councilmember Ahmad?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Royce?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Okay, seeing nothing else on the agenda, declare this meeting adjourned.
9:10.